Not many things are more exciting or more excruciating than the annual strategic planning process for a pharma brand. The brand team is focused on creating a plan that's smart, strategically sound, and puts them in a good position with their superiors. The agency wants a plan that includes a lot of tactics that will increase the firm's revenue. The creative team wants a plan that features elements they can enter for awards at the end of the year, and the digital team wants to do something current and cool for once. You, you are squarely in the middle of all these competing priorities, having to make sure everyone is pleased and happy with the outcome. Sound impossible? It is. Just kidding. Rest assured, I've lived through a few of these impossible situations in my time, and I'll talk you through it in this lesson. We're going to review the step-by-step process to create a strategic plan, including the workshops you can hold, the key business questions you can ask, and the way to conduct research and assessment on the market. You'll also have a clear framework to create your plan that can be adapted to multiple pharma companies and templates. At the end of this section, you will be able to identify the key parts of a strategic plan, understand how to kick off the process to create engagement and spur ideation, think through the different market dynamics to create a clear plan, know how to leverage data in the planning process. Let's get started. The first thing is the objective, and to understand the parts of a strategic plan. A strategic plan has four main components. Many pharma brands have their own processes and templates, but all of them have these four areas as the most critical. If you build out a strategic marketing plan for your campaign, this is how you can think about the structure of the plan. We'll go through each of these parts in more detail, but here's a quick overview. The objective is what you want the goal of the campaign to achieve. And the reason that the brand marketer called your agency, most likely, they have a challenge they need help with and have usually defined the objective before they even have sent the RFP. They want to increase sales. That is almost always the case, but sometimes they have a brand that is close to its LOE date or loss of exclusivity, and they want to maintain sales when a competitor goes generic or when a new competitor enters the market. So growth is not always the goal. You should always keep your processes with a clear understanding of the client's marketing goal and keep asking why questions until you understand every nuance. The next part is the target. Who do we need to influence or encourage to act? The target audience is sometimes in need of defining. For a brand that is new and even ones that are older, the target audience is often defined too broadly. A brand is reluctant to leave any customers out of their plan and therefore waters down their value messages and potential for impact. Your job as the strategist is to help them fine-tune their target definition as much as you can and help them define the target specifically. Is the target audience made up of more women than men? Have they likely suffered from their condition for years, or are they newly diagnosed? What is their mindset? What kinds of channels do they use? These are all the questions you need to answer as you define the target audience. The next section is the strategy. What kind of strategies are you going to use? We'll discuss common ones in this lesson, but the biggest thing to remember is that the strategy is an overarching approach to solving the challenge and meeting the objective. It's sometimes tricky to tell the difference between a strategy and a tactic, but the key is to think about the strategy as the approach and the tactic as the actual program. Increasing awareness and trial is the strategy. A multi-channel integrated marketing program is the tactic. Focusing on adherence to lengthen the time on therapy is a strategy. The adherence program itself is a tactic. See how this works? We'll discuss a few more examples. So the next section will talk about the process of kicking off or getting started on your strategic planning process. This is a critical step and one that can easily cause confusion and delays. Starting off correctly will help you get into the right position to achieve your goals. First, let's talk about what needs to happen at the meeting. The purpose of the kickoff meeting is to get everyone aligned on what needs to be done and start the planning process. A simple structure for this meeting might include reviewing the business plan, have the brand marketer provide an overview of the business, how it's doing, where the growth is happening, where it isn't, and what the top goals are for the brand in the coming year. They're typically forecasted sales goals, or if they haven't been approved at the time of planning, you can focus on a general direction based on the state of the business. Do you want to grow the business with new sales? Is there a launch coming up for this brand? A new indication? A new competitor launching? The business review should include all of this information so that you can establish objectives. Next, you need to share the objectives. The best way to do this is align with the brand marketer on the objectives for the campaign prior to the kickoff meeting. A few conversations held before the meeting, often while you're planning the meeting itself, can help with this. Talk through what you want to accomplish. There's more information on how to set up the objectives in a couple of slides. A SWOT analysis is the next step. Whether or not you use the SWOT framework, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, doesn't matter. The strategic planning meeting isn't complete without talking about these strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You don't have to use the framework, but you do have to cover off on all of those areas. I'll talk in a few more slides about this framework and why it's so critical. And then lastly, you'll align on next steps so that everyone leaves the meeting knowing what they're doing. It's important at the kickoff to have everyone at the table. Leaving someone out can cause miscommunication and frustration later in the process. So at the minimum, you should have the brand marketer, who should play a lead role in the meeting, and both the marketing and the sales leads. The MLR team, I often find this team gets left out, and they're critical to the process of approving and shaping the message to the market. So it's important to have them in some of these initial meetings so they can participate in the discussion. They're especially helpful with including all the creative team members. They have to interpret the plan and turn it into compelling messages, so it's important that they're there. Finally, the media team or the media partner if your agency doesn't plan to buy media. They have the tools and the data that can help bring the target audience to life and be a great partner during this process. At the end of the meeting, you should be able to check off all of the items on the checklist here. If you can't check something off, for example, maybe you have questions about how to define the target, you should at least have a next step in getting this information defined. So let's talk about the objectives. In my football analogy, the objective is easily defined, points on the scoreboard, ideally more than your opponent by the end of the game, and often through making touchdowns. The objective for strategic marketing campaigns can be more nuanced and challenging. The objectives are often multifaceted and driven by different siloed groups within the organization. There's also challenges with making sure objectives are measurable. So let's look at some examples. A strong and clear objective needs to be quantifiable so that you'll know when you get there. And the best way to do that is how to think about what you're going to measure. So the examples on the left are weak objectives because they have no element of quantifiable measurement associated with them. They need a number to be impactful. These are also real objectives brand marketers have given me over the years as they've discussed their planned goals. As you can see on the right, what you need to do is take the objective that's general and somewhat unfinished and complete it by adding a number. And this is often where the best conversations about strategy happen. Your client may say grow sales. You ask how much, thinking 10% is a reasonable goal from your analysis of the market. They say 25%, and you realize that you may need to think more aggressively about their spend and how they're approaching the customers. The other stronger objectives here are examples of how general objectives can be made measurable. They're good starting points from when a client is struggling to define the objectives. So the sales growth is easy. You just give it a number, in this case 25%. Improving choice and preference, that will require some market research, so you should partner with a consultant to help you with that. And you could have a goal to improve the percent of patients selecting the brand as one of their top tier, maybe thinking about their top tier preferences in the research that's conducted. Maintaining market share is another easy one to measure, and so you can measure the market share, and usually the analytics department will be doing that. And then you can increase awareness. You can measure through market research, or you can measure through engagement in the campaign. And sometimes they talk about dominating a category, and it's good to understand what that means. Does that mean increasing and having the most market share by a margin of 5% or more? Understanding what they mean when they talk about owning the category could be important because sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with market share and it might have more to do with the perception among physicians. Next is the SWOT analysis. Now you can use the SWOT analysis to make sure that your objective is the right one, and the SWOT information can also drive strategies later in the process. So the SWOT analysis is fairly easy to conduct. You talk about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The key thing here is to think about the matrices. So when you're having these discussions about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, you have the horizontal matrix, which is all about either promoting and growing on the left hand or protecting and correcting on the right hand. And then you have your focus. So on the vertical axis, you have your focus. The top things, the strengths and the weaknesses, those are internal focuses. Those are specific things that the brand has and does or doesn't do that make it a strong or a weak brand. And the external focus is about competitors, the market situation, new entrants, the state of patients, and maybe the difficulty of diagnosing. So those areas are external to the brand. They present opportunities or a threat to the growth that's planned. Next, you talk about defining the target. When you define the target, it's important to think about who you want to talk to, and not necessarily the target for the campaign, um, and is sometimes different than the target for the brand. The brand will sometimes want to talk to everyone, and that's important that their medication be available to anyone who it is appropriate for. But when you're talking about who's going to be responding to the campaign and who's going to be targeted in the campaign, it's a little more challenging. So you really start to think about the tools that you need to define and understand the market. So there's several different tools that you should ask for. Most brands will have these tools to help you prepare for this campaign planning. The first one is data. They probably have prescription data from IQVIA or prevalence data from the Centers of Disease Control or the CDC. That will tell you how big the market is. Then they'll have research. They will have conducted patient journey research, patient segmentation research, and getting that information and getting a briefing from the consulting firm that conducted that research can be highly helpful. They'll also have Mars data that will help you understand the type of health and survey information, how different types of patients engage in different types of media. They'll have shopper data that will tell you information about the lifestyles of different patients. And then you can do some observation. There's some social media listening that can be done. You can go to medical conferences, sit in on advisory boards, and some of these reports may already be available. And then you should look at the market. Who's out there in the market already? Where are patients going to get treatment if they're not getting it from your client's brand? So if they're going to the pharmacy and getting something over the counter, are they going to a competitive brand? You start to kind of understand who the competitors are in this market. And then also patient advocacy groups. They can be a great partner to understand what patients need and what are some of the challenges that patients have. So that could help you understand the target more. And lastly, a process map. This is different than a patient journey because it's not talking specifically about the emotional steps that a patient might go through. It's talking about all of the different elements and parts and pieces of that path to treatment. So do they see a general practitioner and then the patient needs to get diagnosed by a specialist? Do they have to go to the hospital? Is there typically a certain type of doctor that prescribes it? Do they go to the pharmacy? Do they go to an infusion center? What are all of the different places that they're going so you can understand the process of getting a patient onto therapy? It's important to think about the strategic growth pairs when you're setting your strategy. So, some of these things are kind of in conflict with each other, and it can be important to start to think about how you're going to engage. So, as we start to talk about the strategy, there's probably kind of three different pairs that's important to think about. There's the first one, which is sales versus margin. So when you're thinking about increasing the profitability in a campaign that is designed to generate sales, that's a campaign that's designed to really go after and get a large volume of people to try the brand. So there might be some additional things that the brand is going to do to create promotions to drive sales. That might be coupons, or it might be copay cards, or it might be a pretty significant DTC campaign. But there's something going on there to generate sales. The other side of it is to increase margin. So maybe if you want to increase margin, you want to keep patients on therapy longer. So instead of just the high volume and the number of sales, you may have a group of patients and you want to increase adherence. And so then you're able to increase the profitability of those patients by increasing the length of time that they spend on the brand. Then second pair is market versus share. So you could make sure that you have broad awareness and understanding of the market. Maybe you're doing some disease awareness to grow the market and identify new patients. Or are you fighting with competitors for a slice of a consistently fixed piece of pie or a share of the market? So that's an important thing to think about. And lastly, this idea of acquisition versus organic. If you have a campaign that is focused on acquiring new patients and acquiring growth, then you've got a campaign that's pretty aggressive, that's pretty heavy in media, that's going out and talking about strategies to increase awareness and generate new patients and new understanding. If you're talking about organic, then you might be thinking about patients that you currently have, or taking a look at growing through current patients. Maybe this is something you could work with a patient advocacy organization on, and reaching out to patients a little bit more through different types of channels. So those are the types of things as you think about those growth pairs that's important to consider. And when you think about these different pairs, sometimes it's helpful to think in terms of what non-pharma brands think of. And so if non-pharma brands are thinking about how to, think about the organic versus acquisition, sometimes non-pharma brands are thinking about acquiring a book of business from another brand or another therapy. And you do sometimes have your pharma brands that will be transitioning patients that were on and maybe an earlier type of therapy and on to this newer one that they're launching. So those are important things to consider as well. As you start to think about strategies you need for the plan, there's a couple of other ways you can start to think about it. These are methods that you can use to enhance the campaign focus and develop strategies that drive innovative campaigns. So the first method that we're showing here is the 5 Ps. So this is the product, price, place, and promotion. And the last fifth one is people, because that's something important. So as our campaigns have gotten incredibly complex, it's important to keep the 5 Ps in mind. Product is very simple. That's the product, that's the brand, what does it treat, how common is the condition, how many people have it, this is all about the product and what it does. Price, usually for our work we don't have much that we deal with for price, but there is important to understand the influence of price and how important it is. And you should also start to think about how does price get included in the patient's experience. Place, this is usually where things are distributed, and in pharma, most things are distributed in the pharmacy, although you do have lots of drugs that are delivered in infusion centers and in the doctor's office, so important to understand place and how the product gets to the patient. Promotion. This is the piece you're going to be building as the campaign itself. So at this point, it's important to understand what restrictions exist for the promotion of the product. Is this something that can be sampled or not? Is there a copay card or any free voucher trials that will be offered? And lastly is people. What does the ideal patient for this type of therapy look like? What are the physicians that they see? How are those physicians being targeted? Is this product uniquely valuable to these kind of patients and physicians, and if so, how? We're also including a method here of the market map. And this is a useful tool to help understand the players in the market and how the sales process works. Usually you draw this out and make notes about on who's in each category. It's just something to help you get a lay of the land. So it's just a nice exercise to start thinking about all of these different players and stakeholders and how they're connected. So as you start to think about these different types of areas, it's important to think about what you need to do to help you understand the situation and the market, and so that you can start to help your clients develop the kind of strategies that they're going to need in their plan. So a quick note about writing the strategies. The best practices indicate that a strategy starts with an action-oriented word. So think about words like drive, develop, design, engage, position, reinforce, pull through, promote. All of those words and other action words are great words to start your strategy statement. So now that you have your strategies written, you'll be ready to set your tactics. Like I mentioned before, tactics are the programs you're going to put in place to achieve the strategy. In terms of the game of football, the tactic is the decision of what kind of play the team will decide to do. Are they going to pass or run the ball? The elements of the tactics are the players, the skilled quarterback, the incredibly fast runner, but the tactical program is the overarching plan for achieving the strategy of moving the ball down the field. So as we think about the tactical playbook, tactics can fall into several different areas. So this also kind of like different chapters in a playbook that can be used when developing tactics. So as we think about these different areas, there's probably like 3 big buckets. The first one is sales. How are we going to leverage the Salesforce messaging? What is the sampling campaign? Are there voucher or trials? Are we conducting education in the office, conference programs, all of those types of things? The second area is advertising promotion. This is all about getting the word out. Raising awareness for a brand means creating branded or unbranded multi-channel programs, social media programs, event marketing, social media influencer outreach, copay programs, all those types of elements are the big parts of the campaign. And lastly, adherence. This is where you might want to think about how are you encouraging the adherence to the drug. So do you have mobile reminder programs, adherence campaigns, support programs? If you think about all of these areas that you pull from for your tactical and find which tactics and which tactical programs would be the best for which strategies, you'll ensure that you have a comprehensive program. So lastly, it's about keeping score. And when we think about keeping score, it's all about measuring the impact. How do you know that you're winning the game? Well, you have to take some measurements. I'm just not going to spend a lot of time here, but just at a very high level, there's some very simple ways that you take measurements. So the first one is just activity. What is happening? What is the click-through rate to the digital ads? How many impressions are being put into market? Just what's happening. And this is really generated by the campaign itself. Often your agency or your media partner will provide this data to the client as proof that the advertisement and the message is being placed in market and ran according to their agreed upon plan. There's usually an audit process that tracks this and reports back to on the completion of that process as part of the contract. But there are other metrics that you can use to understand how the patient is responding. Are they downloading information? Are they posting about it? And this can start to help you understand how they're engaging in the areas of the campaign. And lastly, with the objectives. What are the sales? What are the market share? What changes are you seeing there? All of those things can be used to help understand how the specific campaign is performing in the market to drive the end result. So this concludes the section on strategic thinking. Well done! You've learned about strategic thinking and the processes of looking at a problem from a higher level, how to use different approaches to evaluate a problem from a strategic standpoint, and how to build a strategic plan and monitor the data. So there's one area of pharma marketing that affects the strategic success of nearly every campaign, and it's the second P in the 5 Ps we talked about. That's price or access. As a leader of your team, you understand the way treatments are priced and made available is critical to becoming a strategic partner with your clients. So in the next section, we're going to go through this area in depth. I can't wait to talk to you more in the next section. Thanks.